You're listening to The Sound of Pursuit. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. I'm excited about the show today. I've got Rachele Davis on the line. She's a longtime colleague and friend. She's written several great articles for Pursuit magazine, and now she's a course author for PI education. If you by chance need continuing education to maintain your PI license, please visit us over at pieducation.com. I can tell you, if you're interested in researching into family history and locating relatives, birth parents in specific, Rachele's class is one you need to check out. If you're just interested about research in general as a private investigator, Rachele's course is one you need to check out. Rachele has a really interesting niche. She helps reunite birth families. Her clients are adoptees looking for biological parents or siblings, and sometimes parents looking for the children they gave up for adoption. That process can be an emotional roller coaster for everybody involved. It requires diplomacy, ethics, and compassion to handle all that as an investigator. Today, Rachele is here with one of her former clients. I'll let her introduce him in just a minute. And we're going to talk about what it's like to find out where you came from after wandering for your whole life, and what it's like to escort a person through that process. Rachele, thank you for taking the time to be here. I cannot thank you enough. I'm so excited about the chat we're going to have today.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me, Hal. And thanks to everybody at PI Education. You guys do some great work. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and talk about my work. It's something that I love to do. I love my job, and I love to share what I do with other people. So thanks for having me.
I love it. Well, do this for me, for our listeners that don't know who Rachele Davis is. Tell us how you got started as a private investigator and what drew you to reuniting birth families.
So I started out as a school teacher, and then I quickly figured out that was not what I wanted to do. And so I went back to school while I was teaching. I got my degree in criminal justice, my master's degree in criminal justice. And I stepped into that field as a crime analyst for my local police department. And I was very satisfied with that job. I absolutely loved the work that I did up until my husband and I adopted our son back in 2015. And during that process, we actually hired a private investigator to try and help us locate our son's biological father, just to move the adoption along. And once we adopted our son, I knew that I wanted to find work that would better suit my schedule, my differing schedule, and just be more flexible for me. So my husband is actually the one who first put private investigations on my radar. We were just kind of brainstorming one night, and he brought that up, and I decided pretty quickly to run with it. I combined my love for criminal justice with the love for my son and the adoption of my son, just to sort of naturally progress into a private investigator who specializes in helping adopted persons or donor conceived, or what we call NPEs. An NPE is not parent expected.
Okay.
So that could be like if somebody maybe registers their DNA and just for fun, and they find out, oh my gosh, my dad, who I thought was my biological father, is not. Just kind of different cases like that. But anyway, so I help all those different kinds of people identify and locate, and then sometimes contact their biological family members.
That is absolutely cool. I came about the PI business in a similar way. It wasn't my spouse that suggested it. I had a dear friend of mine, an attorney, just mentioned in passing one day, you might consider private investigations. Rachele, when you were a kid, did you dream of being a private investigator?
I did not. It's so funny because I have always loved anything really to do with criminal justice. I remember I started out, I kind of cut my teeth on shows like Unsolved Mysteries, Murder, She Wrote. I used to watch with my mom, Matlock. I loved all of those crime shows back in the 80s and 90s. And so it was something I was always interested in, but I don't really know why I didn't consider growing up and doing something in criminal justice. It really just seemed to be more of just, oh, I just enjoy this. But my husband is one who's like, you love all that stuff. Why don't you do something with criminal justice? And I was like, why didn't I talk to you about this a couple years ago? Because I'm so interested in it. And so I just sort of hit the ground running and never looked back, and I love it. I love what I
Yeah,
do.
I love it. I'm so glad that you're in the business. I'm so glad that we've gotten to know each other over the past few years. Rachele, in addition to being an instructor here at PI Education, she has joined us on a couple of occasions for a small mastermind group of investigators from around the country, around the globe, to talk about best practices, ethics, those kind of things. Rachele, again, I'm excited that you're here, but I'm also excited to bring in your guest. You've got a guest with us today. Do you mind to introduce Jeff for us?
I would love to. So I'm very pleased to introduce to you my former client, Jeff Dovich, who was adopted. Jeff hired me at the very beginning of 2023, kind of end of 2022. We started chatting to help him to try and locate his birth mom and then eventually his birth dad as well. Jeff is he's from New York. That's where he was born and adopted. And historically, in the state of New York, the laws just prohibited adopted persons from gaining any access to any of their information. When a person is adopted, they are typically issued a pre-adoption birth certificate. So a lot of people don't know that, but people who are adopted most of the time have two birth certificates. So the pre-adoption birth certificate is the one that lists the biological mother. Occasionally we'll list the biological father, but a lot of times that's blank. And so the state of New York, I believe it was in January of 2020 when they officially changed their law, but they made it so Jeff and others who are like him can gain access to their original or their pre-adoption birth certificate. So that's what Jeff did. And so after he got that, a copy of that, thankfully they changed that law. And then he contacted me to try and help him navigate locating and then reaching out to his birth mom and then eventually his birth dad.
Okay. Well, Jeff Dovich, thank you so much for joining us today. I literally, the fact that you're willing to be on this podcast and talk about your experiences is I think it indicates a real strong sense of character that you're willing to share your story. I'd like it, Jeff, if you would just kind of step back a little bit and, at some point you learned you were adopted. Why did you decide to start looking for your birth parents?
Um, so after watching my parents' health decline, they both died horrific deaths. My mother died in 2014 from Lou Gehrig's disease, and then watching the onset of Parkinson's start on my father, probably like in 2018, I knew I wanted to find out like a little backstory on my biological parents' health, just so I could see something coming in the future if it was something I needed to look out for. And
Sure.
plus, every time I went to the doctor, like, what's your family history? Do you have any family history of heart disease or anything like that? And I was like, I don't know, so that was a big thing. So that was probably the main objective was just trying to get a baseline of like my health, genetic health. And so that's got the ball rolling.
I gotcha. I gotcha. I'm sorry that you had to watch your parents go through those situations. My father just passed away the week before Thanksgiving, 2024. He had Alzheimer's and had the attendant Parkinson's disease going along with that. It is an absolutely horrible thing to watch and witness. Um,
Mhm.
do me a favor, Jeff, and kind of walk us through your story of applying for your original birth certificate. Did you try to find out who your parents were before 2019, before the law changed?
No, I never really, I was happy. I had a great life. My adoptive parents were fantastic, and I really never had a reason to look and no desire to look. So, um, but then after when things started to progress, was me and my wife were speaking, and I was like, I'm gonna try and find out like a little backstory. And I knew that the adoption went through, it was called Catholic Charities at the time. So I went on through like bunch of different websites and wound up getting like an application through the state. And I think that was like May of 2019. I submitted that. And then I got a response back from that relatively quick, probably like in July. Got like a generic letter basically saying, no names, no nothing, but basically your mom came in, she was healthy, she was this, she was that. Basically gave some not great information, but it was a start.
Sure.
And then, so then I think they needed a fee and an application form and some money. And so that got submitted. And I think finally in March of 2020, I actually got the official birth certificate and a packet of different information. So,
And I'm just curious, like this is one of those bits of information that seems like a pretty important thing. What was it like to see that birth certificate?
a little crazy. It's like actually now you have a name, and like my name then was like Michael Francis. And I was like, oh, I'm Michael Francis. I'm not Jeffrey, so a little weird. And then it's like just a bunch of questions. What's the backstory? Why was I put up for adoption? What my mother, what was her life like? What did she do? Just millions of questions that, kind of come to your mind. You're like, huh, you just wonder.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So you've gone through the process in the state of New York of obtaining your original birth certificate. You have a name now. You've got obviously just a whirlwind of questions rolling through your mind. At
mhm.
what point did you turn to Rachele? Tell us about that first call. How did you even know to look for her?
So me and my wife had discussed this and, kind of we're at like dead end, and we were watching TV one night and there was a show where like some celebrity was trying to find like his birth parents or basically similar situation, trying to find, and they wound up hiring like a genealogist and they wound up connecting and the whole thing. So my wife, of course, she's very anal and very meticulous. And so she started searching the internet and found a group that specialized in this type of work. And basically, she narrowed it down to three different investigators. She's like, here, I found these three, see what you think. So I read each of their backstories, and like immediately, as soon as I saw Rochelle's, that's the one, law enforcement. Was at the time I was current law enforcement. Now I'm retired, but similar law enforcement. I was like, backstory is great. I was like, this is the one. So then it was like, clicked on her website and I'm interested. And what do I need to do? And so then she got back relatively quick, and the rest is history. I mean,
Wow. Jeff, was it strange? Was it weird asking a stranger for help with something like this?
no, because I think I was at such a dead end that because previous to this, I tried like 23andMe and Ancestry and tried different avenues and just never came up with anything. And I was just like, maybe I was naive thinking, I was thinking maybe through one of those sites that see something that has a high percentage of you're, 50% or 25% related to this person. And that's not the case at all. So basically I was at a dead end and I was like, I need to do something. And here's a chance.
I love it.
And
I
then
need to hire a professional. I found one that I like, and her name is Rachele Davis. Rachele, do me a favor. Pick up this story with your side. Tell us, what was that first call from Jeff like? And tell us about your investigation.
All right. So it's been a minute since Jeff first contacted me, but as I recall, he did reach out to me through my website. I have a form that you can fill out that's basically saying, hey, I'm interested, send me some information. And so that was our initial communication. And so I replied and gave him what I give to anyone who inquires, just some information, more detailed information about myself, who I am, why I do, what I do, my company. And he real quickly filled out a questionnaire and also included all of his adoption paperwork, including all of that, like non-identifying, what we call non-identifying information about birth parents. Anything that's non-identifying just means you're not naming, the birth parents, but you're maybe giving a social history, their ages, some information on their family, health information, stuff like that. And so he included all of that and also included his pre-adoption birth certificate. He was extremely thorough, which I love to see. He also had mentioned that he had registered with both Ancestry and 23andMe. So I could tell right away that Jeff meant business. He was very well prepared and he was ready to jump into a search. So we set up a Zoom call where I met Jeff and his wife, Crystal. I met them face to face. And I love that Jeff included his wife in this because that just kind of told me that he had the support that he needed to, step into this search because you just never know what kind of doors you're going to be going through.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be, it can be difficult. It can be emotional. You don't really know how you're going to feel about it. I mean, you can feel very well prepared, but it's just can be a difficult thing. So it was really nice. And they're both just lovely, lovely people. We had a really good conversation. And so I could tell from the get-go, just with his preparation, he had very realistic expectations. So I knew he wasn't under any illusions that things were just going to go perfectly. He's a super smart guy, cautiously hopeful. And so I had no doubts that he would be able to handle, whatever it was we were going to find out. And so Jeff signed on the dotted line and we got started. And the first order of business was to first just positively identify his birth mother. So obviously, I had her name, her first, middle, and last name from that pre-adoption birth certificate. And I also had some, connecting non-identifying information like her age, the city that she was living in at the time when she gave birth to Jeff. It had, I believe, her physical description, an education background, some family information. So I gathered up all of that, and it seemed like there was quite a bit there, but also it had been over 50 years since she had given birth to Jeff. So obviously, with females, you know that their last name is very likely going to change at least once if they get married, and so I just started searching through historical records to begin with. I looked through historical records at ancestry.com and at newspapers.com. Those are kind of my go-tos to start with a lot of times just to see what I can find. And at first I really couldn't narrow her down just because her name is, fairly common. And so Jeff earlier, had said that he had registered his DNA. So I kind of quickly jumped over to that and I looked at his DNA matches and I was able to pinpoint his birth mother's identity through the DNA matches. I, kind of sifted through some of his top matches and I was looking for her surname, obviously. And once I did that, I just kind of looked through, the different family members until I hit pay dirt and found her name. And so I remember the first record I found of her was from the 1950 census. And from there, I remember I went on to classmates.com and I found some high school photos, yearbook photos of her. So I gathered up, the documents that I was finding about her and her family members and, compared all of that to the non-identifying information that Jeff had provided to me. Everything was matching. So, it confirmed I was on the right trail. Located her actually on Facebook and determined that she had gotten married. So I had, that new surname for her. Couldn't quite determine yet if she had any children. There were a couple of names that were like, okay, I don't know if this is, a child or maybe a stepchild or, a nephew, a niece. I wasn't really sure on that. So I shared everything that I was finding with Jeff and Crystal via another Zoom call. And we had, we went through everything and then I sent him all of those details and all those documents in an email. And they started doing some digging on their own. I'm sure Crystal probably did quite a bit. And so, they were kind of finding some things as well. And we kind of paused actually at this point on his birth mother. And Jeff asked me to look into the identity of his birth father. And with his birth father, we did not have nearly as much information. We just had, again, some non-identifying information. We did not have a name, but also, we had that DNA. And so for his birth father, I started just, digging through those DNA matches. And whenever you're looking at DNA, especially when you've identified one birth parent, you can then a little bit more easily kind of sift through the other birth parents' matches. So I knew I was looking at his paternal matches. And he had a match who appeared to probably be a first cousin once removed to Jeff. And so this meant that Jeff was probably a first cousin to this DNA matches, one of her parents, either her mom or her dad. And so based on like other DNA shared matches, I determined that the match was on the mother's side. And so in researching that side of the family, I identified one uncle who, could potentially be Jeff's birth father. And since Jeff had actually reached out to this DNA match prior, just through, I think the match was at Ancestry, and in Ancestry, you can reach out to DNA matches and say, hey, I see that we're related and we share this much, DNA, and you want to talk about it or whatever. And so since he had already been in contact with this DNA match, I was like, hey, why don't you, message her again, and just, now that we have a little bit more information, and see if she's willing to speak with you, and maybe you guys can figure this out. So at that point, we kind of paused on his birth father and then shifted back to his birth mother. So we had her identity, we had her current identity, she was still living. And so at this point, it was like, okay, Jeff, like we're ready to make contact if you want to do that. And he provided, I remember, a really thorough document for me to use whenever I called or attempted to call his birth mother. And I can even let him tell you about that if you want. But it was just a super thorough document that included things like, his basic details, like his birth name, his date of birth, where he was born, but also, who Jeff is as a person, the life that he's led, the fact that he's married, and where he lives, and what he's done with his career, and things like that. And he also included some reassurances to her that his adoptive family was really kind and caring and loving, and he had a great life. And because I think birth parents a lot of times really like to hear that. It kind of gives them a sigh of relief, like, oh, I was hoping, and I've always wondered. And so, yeah, I just kind of included information about his personality, his hobbies, his thoughts on being adopted, and just why he's searching. And so, at this point, Jeff was ready for me to try to give her a call.
I am just absolutely fascinated with this, and thank you for going into so much detail about this. I do want to take a quick moment and just kind of review some of the tools that you use in your work that you've mentioned so far. So we've got classmates.com, we've got newspapers.com, we've got ancestry.com. What are some of the other sources you used in the course of this investigation?
Yeah, so if I remember right, I always use obituaries. Obituaries are just really a gold mine for the type of work that I do, because once you can identify, or even if you haven't identified the person yet, you can a lot of times, make those connections by this person is related to this person, and this is, the brother, and here's the parents. And, if you can get within that family, obituaries are just really awesome. It a lot of times will give me just clearer direction, like, okay, I know that these people are related, but I'm not sure how yet. And so, I might come across an obituary, and there, all the information is right there, and it's, it gives me even more. And a lot of times with obituaries, you'll get information on where a person was living, at the time that maybe their mother passed away. And it's like, okay, this woman has these children, and it lists the children, and it lists their spouses a lot of times, and it'll list the town or the city where they were living. So it really, obituaries, I just can't say enough about them, of just how valuable they can be. for people who are doing this type of work, any kind of genealogy work. So yeah, so obituaries and definitely standard records at places like ancestry.com. I generally use records also at familysearch.org. That's another real big one. Newspapers.com is incredible. We don't really use newspapers the same today, the way that they used to be used, but it's amazing the stuff that you can find that people published in newspapers.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm reading a person's diary and I'm like, this is a published newspaper. This is crazy. But yeah, so especially when you're looking back in time, and a lot of times with this kind of work, if the only thing you have to go on are DNA matches, then a lot of times you are starting way back in time because you're looking at maybe you find a DNA match and you find a common ancestor among some of your DNA matches. And so then you have to just work forward in time and try to determine, okay, so here's a common ancestor. So who did this common ancestor marry? Who are their children? I know that the person I'm searching for is coming from one of their children or their grandchildren or their great grandchildren. And so a lot of times, you're moving forward in time from way back. And so, yeah, I use social media a ton, especially, once I've identified someone, like I had said about Jeff's birth mother, I located her on Facebook and was able to, she has a photo there that I was able to share with Jeff. And so, I also had the classmates.com photos from what she looked like back when she was in high school. So he could have photos of her from, kind of both past and current. And found out just some of her hobbies and things on Facebook. And so, yeah, so social media, I always check social media, and it depends on the age of the person I'm looking for. I say Facebook just because most of my birth parents are older, and most of the older generation are Facebook users. They're not the kids that are going to be on TikTok and stuff like that. But yeah, so I'll do a pretty thorough search on social media to find more current information. And again, I kind of treat Facebook like newspapers.com used to be for historical records. Facebook and other social media platforms, I mean, a lot of times you can look on there and you maybe don't know who this person's parents are or siblings or whatever, but you can look through their feed and they're wishing their mom a happy birthday and tagging her in it, or they have family pictures and then there are comments on the pictures of, hey, I love your dad so much, I really miss Bob, and that type of thing. So again, you can make a lot of family connections through obituaries, through newspapers.com, and now through social media. But yeah, it kind of depends on the case. I mean, if I'm finding the stuff that I need with some of those standard resources that I use, then that's good enough. But then sometimes you have to dig a little deeper and keep going until you figure it out.
Yeah, and all right, so the listeners of this podcast are going to be, curious people out there in the world that are kind of curious about the PI business. They're also going to be private investigators out there and listening to the show just to get tips on, ways they can do their work. And I think one of the interesting things I'm picking up on what you're saying, Rachele, is a lot of times people out there in the world think that we as private investigators have some kind of super top secret database that we go to, and it just gives us all the things at once. What you're doing is going to open source data sources and researching. You're doing the work of a researcher, and you're digging and digging and then putting it together and telling a story. We don't have superpowers as private investigators, except for we're just really curious. And we keep digging and digging and digging. So I think that's really interesting. Like most of the time when we talk to private investigators, we hear stories about, well, I accessed TLO or IRB and it just kind of gave me all this stuff. But you haven't mentioned the standard PI databases yet.
Yeah, they are definitely valuable to me, but really more just at the end. Once I have done all of my research using, these open sources, a lot of public records. Once I've done all that and built all of that out, then at this point, like when I was getting ready to make contact with Jeff's mom, I did run her in one of those databases and found a current phone number, current address, just some more information about her, which is typical of what private investigators do. But for me, the work that I do, I can't use those databases until I know who it is I need to be running.
You got to know who to look for. You got to have you gotta have a
Yeah.
starting place. And I want to
Yeah.
make this really clear. So for my investigator friends out that are listening, you're picking up on this already. All of this information, it's publicly available. Anybody can have access to it. That's not the magic. The magic of a professional investigator is the process and the systematic way that they go through the information and organize it to narrow it down to one specific person. And that's what you're hearing Rachele talk about is what someone pays for when they hire a private investigator is a competent professional investigator is going to have a process and a system for organizing this information and going through it. And honestly, Rachele, I've heard people talk about trying to find birth parents on their own, and what happens most of the time is they'll go down a rabbit hole, they'll go down a rabbit hole, they'll go down a rabbit hole, and then they can't remember where they connect or where they started with this one or that one, and it's a process that makes it make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more you do this type of research, the better you get. You have little shortcuts, you have all these different resources, but you're not going to use every single resource with every single case. I mean, that's just not I'm sure Jeff didn't want to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for me to just exhaustively, go through every resource out there. And you make a good point. I think private investigators, we know where to look, we know what we're looking for, and we know the quickest, best way to get that information. The information I was looking for, I could have found in a few different places, but for Jeff, who's paying me, I'm not going to spend 2 hours on something when I can do it in 20 minutes. I'm going to do the 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So for me, my job is, okay, Jeff wants me to find these answers to his questions, and that is the whole point of what I'm doing for him. But I'm also trying to do it in the least amount of time as possible. So he's paying me the least amount of money that he needs to be paying for something like this.
Yes, and part of that is it's like when you go to the mechanic to get work done on your car, he knows exactly which drawer to open to grab which tool to do that one thing that he has to do to whatever it is he's doing. And it saves time by having the process and knowing the tools and being familiar with the tools. So that's the main thing I want to get out of that. Now, Rachele, I could listen to you talk all day long, but Jeff, I want to hear a little bit more from you. So, Rachele's done all this work. You now have a name.
We just back up for a second. So like when we finished our first Zoom with Rachele, she's like, all right, I'll do what I'm going to do and I'll reach back out to you. I'm like, okay, perfect. Within 2 days, she sent an email being like, hey, we need to set up a Zoom. And I was like, totally floored. She's like, I definitely found your mother and I'm pretty sure I found your father. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe how quick that was. So, but yeah, no, it was fantastic.
And all right, so just since we're stepping back to that point in time, so if you had tried to do that on your own, it may have taken you 2 to 3 weeks to get to the same spot she got to in 2 days, and probably less than 2 days because she's, as most of us investigators, we're not just working on one thing at a time. But I mean, that saved you money and time in the long run.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So you've got a name. You know where to find her. You've now got a photograph. First of all, what was that like when you see a picture of your actual mom?
It was crazy. And so I've showed it to family and Crystal and everybody else, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we definitely see the resemblance between your mother and you." And crazy thing is, she was like 40 miles from where I live,
Oh my gosh.
like right there. Probably drove through that town multiple times, and you know, it's crazy.
So, what did you decide to do with that information?
Um, Basically, I took it, and I wanted Rachele at some point to reach out and see what would happen.
And Rachele mentioned you had a document that provided her with all of this information. Tell me about that document, what you put in there, and why you put so much information in there.
Well, my biggest thing was I wasn't looking for anything. You see these stories of people come back into somebody's life, they drain their bank accounts, or they're trying to disrupt the whole family. I was like stressing that. I'm like, I'm not looking for anything. I'm financially secure. I'm good. I just want to. The main reason was the health, and then basically, if it would go further than that, we'll see where it goes. But I definitely was stressing that. Not looking for anything, and I'm not looking to cause any problems. I've had a great life. My adoptive parents were fantastic. So it was good. So that's what I wanted to stress to her.
Okay.
Not that had some different motive to come back into somebody's life after 50 years.
Yeah, that's all right. So this is leading me back to Rachele. Rachele, tell us about that call.
Alrighty. So I was able to get Jeff's birth mom on the phone, and she agreed to speak with me. I introduced myself, and she very quickly confirmed that she is Jeff's birth mother. She also verified at the beginning that she did not ever have any other children, which is a little unusual. She was very shocked that we had identified and found her. I mean, we're talking about, back in 1970, she was told the adoption would forever be closed. There would be no way for this child that she's placing for adoption to ever come back and figure out her identity, which is very common, especially kind of the further back you go in time. And so, back in 1970, adoption was still shrouded in secrecy. So she was really in a state of shock. She was pretty stressed, but also willing to speak with me and very, very kind. Just in shock. I could tell through our whole conversation she was just kind of reeling, because there's no way to prepare someone to just out of the blue receive a phone call one day and say, "Hey, guess what?" Um, and so I really reassured her a lot in the beginning that, you know, anything she passed on to me, this is something that's going to remain confidential. I even told her I won't give Jeff even your phone number, your address. Everything can run through me. So I want to, reassure you of that. Um, and so she did share information about her family. She did provide some additional health information. I know Jeff had some health information, but that was from back, when he was born. And so as time progresses, things happen, and there's more health information there. And so she provided that. I remember she stated to me that she has a sister that is who's still living, and she said, "My sister still today doesn't even know that Jeff exists." She was younger whenever Jeff was born. And she just, I could again just tell in her mind, she's like, "My sister doesn't even know." Um, and so again, I gave her a lot of reassurances, and told her, "Hey, I'm not gonna be calling your sister and outing you to her or anything like that." And at the time when I spoke with her, she was like, I don't really know what to do. I don't know that I want to pursue this any further. Here's the information, that you're asking for. And, maybe in the future, my husband is having some fairly significant health issues right now. And this is a lot. And I'm like, "Hey, I completely understand." And so I gave her all of my information, and just encouraged her, "Hey, if you ever want to reach back out to me in the near future or even in the distant future, here's my information." and at the end of our conversation, I remember that, Jeff was still, trying to confirm the identity of his birth father. And so I did ask her about his birth father, and she did say that when she got pregnant, that she called him, and he didn't really believe her. And she said the words that Jeff is better off not knowing. And I could tell, I didn't know exactly what she meant. I didn't really press her a whole lot more because I press as hard as I can for my client, but I also know when to back off. And so I
Yeah.
was like, that's fine, completely understand. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we just kind of left it at that.
Yeah. So Jeff, I can imagine that this is a bit of an emotional roller coaster for you. You got a photograph, you have a name, you're thinking maybe now I get to talk to my mom, but it's not the outcome you were hoping for. Tell me about how that felt, and what was your conversation with Rochelle like during that when she was telling you that?
Yeah, it is what it is. Going into this, didn't really know what to expect, and we made it pretty far considering. So I got the health information I was looking for and got some backstory, and it's pretty rewarding. She's into like public service. She was like a nurse for 40 plus years. I was in public service. So it's kind of pretty cool that coincidentally that worked out that way. But I think it's a win, even though she didn't want to meet right now. Maybe in the future it'll happen, but I still think it's a win.
I love that. And I think, Jeff, and I don't know you, I don't know your wife, but I think having a supportive partner in life helps out in a situation like this because there had to be some disappointment there. But having someone there with you to be with you and walk you through that, I
Yeah,
just have to
absolutely.
imagine that helped.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Rochelle, I assume this kind of thing happens kind of often in the work that you do. How do you prepare your clients for the possibility that things may not go the way they expect or hope?
Yes. Jeff and Crystal and I had discussed possible outcomes that could happen before I ever, attempted to reach out to his birth mom. And they both just seemed very well prepared to accept whatever the outcome was going to be. He was hopeful for some additional information, which he got. Um, he was hopeful to kind of learn a little bit more about kind of, the story of obviously the birth father's identity, but how did the two meet? Kind of the story of why he was placed for adoption. Um, and as of now, that hasn't been the case. He hasn't found all of those answers through her like he had hoped to. But he also Jeff was very before I ever reached out to her, he made it very clear that he understands, if this is a chapter in her life she just kind of wants to put behind her, or if it's too painful to revisit. Again, just had super realistic expectations about it. So like he said, it wasn't necessarily a big letdown. It was he considers it a win.
Yeah.
And I think so too. And I think for her, even though she, has not at this point reached out any further. Um, I think for her, it probably very likely gave her some peace with the whole situation and just gave her a few answers. Maybe she didn't, she wasn't looking for them, but for her to know that this child that she placed for adoption was raised in a really good family and he's turned into a great man and a productive member of society. That has to be nice to hear.
Yeah, that's got to be. I mean, I can imagine if you're in a situation, and if we go back to the 1970s, a situation where you're putting a child up for adoption, being terrified for so many reasons, the lack of certainty about the future, am I doing the right thing for the child, and having that kind of information come to you has to be good for them. But this is not the end of the story we're talking about. You guys paused the investigation for a while, but then you found out some more information. Rochelle, first of all, tell me why you waited before initiating a search for Jeff's father. Tell us a story about that. What happened there?
Yes. So, with Jeff's birth mom, the comment she made that he's better off not knowing. I mean, Jeff and I talked about that. Like, what could that mean? And I think that that is really, more the thing that Jeff was like, I think I'll just leave things currently as they are, and then, maybe reach out to you again, and we'll just see. And so I heard from Jeff about, I think it was about 8 months later. And he had news. He had been in contact with the DNA match that I had mentioned earlier, the paternal DNA match. And basically, through this match, the identity of his birth father was confirmed. And it was the uncle that I had collected a little bit of information on for the match. And so he also, Jeff learned that he had a half sister, that his biological father has a daughter. And yeah, so Jeff really is the one who found out, and kind of gathered that information. And so, yeah, I mean, Jeff can probably speak better to exactly how that went with his DNA match and what that was like.
Yeah, Jeff, do you want to kick in there?
So the original DNA match through ancestry was would be a second cousin. And then so communicating with her, I wound up getting a pretty good bond with her aunt, so my first cousin. So we would text back and forth, and then finally we met, like I think it was probably maybe in September of 23, I
Mhm.
think. So like she's probably we each drove like 45 minutes and like met for breakfast, and we had like a 2 hour conversation, and she filled me in on my birth father, who we'll just call him Tom. Um, filled me in on Tom and a little bit about his life and stuff. So it was good, and it was not awkward. It was comfortable, and it was very informative. So it was good.
So you get all that information kind of on your own. You talked to Rachele. Rachele, did you place a phone call to his birth father?
I did.
Tell us about
Yes, I
that.
did. Okay, so I remembered gathering some information about him before I called about Jeff's birth father. And I had seen where he was married to the same woman for many years and she had passed away. So it looked like Jeff's birth father was living on his own, which that's always something that I'm concerned about, is just maintaining the privacy of the birth parent. So I don't just, call a landline and leave a message or anything like that. And so, but when I called Jeff's birth father, it was his cell phone. And so I went ahead and left a little bit of a cryptic voicemail, I'd say, on his cell phone, something to kind of entice him to call me back. I told him who I was and the work that I do, and I just shared with him that I have a current client who was trying to identify his birth father, and that my client had registered his DNA and had biological ties to Tom's family. And so I just tried to hook him a little bit. I didn't just come out and say, "Hey, I think that you're the birth father," but it worked, and he pretty much called me back right away. And Jeff's birth father, Tom, he said that he had been expecting my call because his niece, who had met with Jeff a few months prior, had said something to him about Jeff and trying to identify his birth father and the DNA connection, and so he did have a bit of a heads up. And so when he called me back, he was very warm. He gave me lots of information on his background, his family, the life he's lived, his health history. He really was an open book, which was awesome for Jeff. Tom shared also the story of meeting Jeff's birth mother. They met at a bar, and it was just a one night thing. That was it. He did remember her calling him to say that she was pregnant, but Tom never heard anything else from her. And so he just kind of put it out of his mind. He even had crossed paths a couple of times over the years with Jeff's birth mother, and she never approached him, never said anything further. So,
Mm.
again, he just kind of put it out of his mind. But yeah, that's how our conversation went, and Tom said he is, 100% open to having a conversation with Jeff, and so I hung up the phone with Tom, and then let Jeff know.
Jeff, what happened next?
So then I think it was probably like in Octoberish. I think I sent like an email to Tom just introducing myself, a little backstory, and basically stressing again that I'm not looking to disrupt his family or have like don't know ulterior motive involved. I just trying, find some history, health history, and a friendship and see where it goes. And he emailed back relatively quickly, and we corresponded for quite a bit. And then in April of 24, we set up where I was going to Florida, and we wound up meeting down there and had a great time. So we went and got to his house, went up to the door, knocked at the door. He answered the door. It was like, wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. We went in his house, sat for a good hour, and went to lunch for another hour or two, and then back to his house. And it's probably 4 or 5 hours of conversation, and it wasn't weird. It was pretty good. So gave me a
Wow.
little bit of his life story, and I think back. He was in one of those careers where you work hard, you play hard, and I think a lot of working and a lot of drinking and things happen. So,
Wow. This is just such a fascinating story. Jeff, looking back at this whole process, was this easier or harder than you thought it was going to be?
definitely easier. Rachele did all the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and again, you know, I mentioned earlier, I think, you must have a strong and loving partner in your wife. Talk to me about bringing your wife into this process. How did she support you through this? Did she go with you to meet your birth father, that kind of business?
Oh yeah, she's been next to me the whole journey, uh, the emails, the Zoom calls, the breakfast with the cousins, and then since that first breakfast, we've gone and met my other cousins, and so she's been there every time. Went to Florida to see Tom. She's been there, 100% supportive of this. So it's been a blessing to have her by my side.
Good, 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 good. All right. I'm curious, have your feelings changed about the fact that you were adopted, about your birth family, now that you know more about them?
No, no, I think I'm been very blessed. I had a great life, and now if I can start a new chapter with the new family members, that's good. I gained some family members because I didn't have a big family. It was basically me and an adoptive brother, and then he's got some wives and kids and stuff. So to have some new family members is pretty cool.
I like that. Rachele, let me ask you this. You do this work. It's just the work, right? I'm just doing my job. You and I both know that's not true. Every case is special. Every case has a thing. What did you learn from this?
Yeah, I really learned through Jeff's birth mother, I would say that her reaction just reiterated to me that these cases can bring such anxiety and stress and shock to birth parents in particular. And her response is just a good reminder to me to be gentle and be kind, be empathetic and understanding. And like I said before, push as much as I can on behalf of my client to get as much information as I can, but also knowing when to back off. And then Jeff's birth father's reaction just gave me all the feels. It's why I do what I do. As you can tell by now, I mean, Jeff is a very, very kind and gentle person. And when I talked with Tom, he gave off the same exact vibe. And it's neat to see how genetics play a part in a person's life, whether they were raised by that person or not. That's really cool to see. And I learned too, you never write anyone off. You never really close a case. I mean, I treat Jeff's case like it's wide open still, if his birth mom decides to reach out one day.
Yeah. Yeah. Jeff, last question. If there's somebody out there listening to this podcast that is looking at a similar thing, they know they're adopted, they don't know who their birth parents are, they haven't gotten their birth certificate yet, any of those things, they're thinking about looking for their biological parents or siblings or children or whatever. What do you wish someone had told you? What advice would you have for someone out there looking for this type of information?
To definitely put the money out and get a genealogist to assist you. I mean, you still have to do all the initial legwork, but put it in the hands of somebody that knows what they're doing. It'll save a lot of time and a lot of effort,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Rachele, Jeff, is there anything I missed? Anything else you want to add to this conversation? We're doing this as both a podcast and as part of Rachele's course for private investigators. Anything else you think I need to include in this? Rachele, Jeff, either one.
I'll say, I just want to thank Jeff for reaching out to me because I was a stranger and, just kind of taking that leap of faith, and allowing me to be a very small part of your story. I have a photo of Jeff and Tom on my wall over here, along with others, other clients that I've been a part of. And by the way, they look exactly alike. It's very cool. But just the wall reminds me that it's good to be connected with people. There are a lot of good people out there, and I want to thank Hal too, just for making this possible. It's been really, really fun.
Well, I've certainly enjoyed having both of you on the show today. This is one of those topics about which I could talk all day long about this work. I think it's in the world of private investigations. There are ups and downs. There are really good celebratory moments, and then just like utterly depressing moments that we as private investigators endure. But the work that Rachele does, it has ups, it has downs. The outcome is not always the way you hope or expect. But even if the outcome is not what you're hoping for necessarily, as you've heard Jeff say, it's good to have the information. It's good to know, to know where that story is and where the situation is, and eliminate some of that question mark, some of that I'm curious. Like just knowing some of that information can be really helpful. Jeff, thank you again for being here with us today. I greatly appreciate your time. Rachele, always good to see you. You've been listening to The Sound of Pursuit, the podcast from Pursuit Magazine and PI Education. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host.